Minasan konnichiwa, Ali desu. Hi everyone, my name is Ali. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, and today we're gonna take a look at my reading statistics in Japanese. So if you guys are new here and you don't know me, my name is Ali. I am a language learner and also a language coach, and my favorite activity is actually to read books in Japanese. As it turns out, I have over the years collected all of the statistics of my reading in Japanese onto Notion, actually, for many different reasons. And based on this Notion database that I've created of all the books that I have ever read in Japanese, I actually extracted the most interesting data for myself first, because I wanted to visualize the type of books that I had read so far, what genres, what was the category mix of the books that I had read so far, also the evolution in the number of books I read per year. And once I had extracted all of those statistics, I realized that this was actually interesting to talk to you about, because I think that you can actually get quite a bit of insight into what it looks like to do a lot of reading immersion in Japanese. And if you are a language learner yourself, whether or not you are learning Japanese, this also may be interesting to you to perhaps apply to your own reading immersion practice. So with that in mind, I have actually prepared some data visualization slides for you guys to present all of those to you. And we're gonna start right away, and because I'm going to look at my screen while I talk to you guys, I'm going to put on my glasses as usual, and let's start. Category 1 is about the number of books I have read over time and depending on my reading year. The first slide I prepared for you guys shows exactly how many books I have read per year of reading. So I started my Japanese language learning journey in 2019, and I properly started reading at the end of 2019, but my first book was finished in January 2020, which is why my reading journey also starts in 2020. So from that year up until this year, obviously this year is not finished, but you can see that I have read 52 books so far this year. You can see that in general there has been an increase of books that I have read in Japanese per year over time, with the exception of the year 2022, which was a bad reading year for me overall, not only in Japanese, also I barely read in English and in French, and that year in particular was punctuated with sickness, with travels. I traveled a lot. I fell sick twice, and there was a lot going on overall. I also moved to Japan. Myself and my husband expatriated ourselves from Singapore to Japan that year as well. So this was quite a challenging environment for me to read. But other than that, you can see a clear evolution in my reading volume over the years, and definitely this reflects what my objective was as well with reading, since my reading immersion obviously accompanied my language learning journey of the language. So the more I studied the language, the more I read, because reading was my favorite activity to do in Japanese, and it was my way to really come across as much vocab as I could, and also to get a lot of immersion in the language, a lot of exposure in the language. So my goal was really to read as much as I could, and I think that this year the number of books I read will probably be the amount of books that I can read realistically in Japanese over the span of 1 year. So we'll see how much that ends up being, but up until this year, really all the books I have read were for reading immersion purposes, and I still struggled, with my reading speed up until maybe the beginning of this year. Now I read pretty much fluently, finally, after 4 years of reading. This year is the 5th year. I am finally as fluent reading in Japanese as I am reading in English. So it does happen, guys, it does happen. Alright, the second category now of data that I want to share with you is the proportion of fiction books I have read versus the non-fiction books I have read up until now. So you can see that I have read in total 166 books, and that actually I've read more fiction than non-fiction books overall. And the one thing I can tell you about this is that I have kind of made a somewhat conscious effort to try and read as much non-fiction as I could, because fiction is much easier to read than non-fiction. Depends on the non-fiction though, but in some instances easier to read. So it's easier for me to read fiction than it is non-fiction. I really made a conscious effort there to try and read as much non-fiction as I could. So this second slide here is also an interesting one because you can see the evolution in the proportion as well. The year 2021 is a good example of me trying to really have a balance between the two categories, and I read 16 books in each category in 2021. However, the tendency reverses itself afterwards, and this year I definitely have read more fiction books than non-fiction books, and this is also because this year I have read a lot more manga and comic essays and comic books than I have read in the previous years. So definitely, because this is fiction most of the time, definitely this has impacted this balance. But my goal is still overall to have kind of an equal balance between fiction and non-fiction that I read in Japanese, simply because those categories are completely different in terms of language, and I think I really need to make a conscious effort to expose myself to both types of language expression. So that's it for the fiction versus non-fiction that I have read over the years. And now let's move on to the third category, which is my book category mix. Alright, this one is really interesting. You can see here all the types of books, and in order we have manga, comic, we have novels, we have essays, we have business books, you know, self-help books, that kind of thing. In Japan, the publishing industry calls them business books. I'm not sure whether that's the same everywhere, but that's how it's called here. And then we have short stories or short story collections, and then we have educational publications, so more like, you know, popular science books, that kind of thing, and books for children, but educational books specifically. And then we have magazines. You can see that the proportion of manga and comic is quite big now. I have read overall 80 in total over the years, but you will see in a minute that actually those were mostly read very recently. Until very recently I actually didn't read that much manga and comic. I have nothing against manga and comics. Actually, I love them. It's just that I was focused on reading other things before I started reading manga and comics. But now I am fully into manga and comics as well. Other than that, I'm very happy to have managed to read 22 novels. I definitely want to read more novels from now on. So novels in Japanese are probably the hardest type of fiction that you can read, just because the language is not straightforward, the expression is not straightforward at all. So I want to focus on them from now on. I have a good balance between short story collections, educational books, business books, essays and novels. And then magazines were just like very punctually. I read 3. Intentionally I read those because the language used in magazines is not really the same as the one used anywhere else. So I was really making a conscious effort here to just diversify my reading materials over time. Alright, the next slide is, like I said, the proportion of manga versus the other categories I have read over time. And this is very interesting because you can see that for the first 3 years of my reading journey in Japanese, I have barely read manga or comics. Only 2 in 2020 and 2021, and then 4 in 2022, and then suddenly the numbers exploded from 2023. I got access, because I moved to Japan in 2022, I finally got access to a lot of comic essays, which I discovered from that point on, and also manga that I actually really like, which is why I just started reading a ton more, and I'm enjoying myself very much. This year I have read 40 out of 52 books, and yeah, like I said, I'm having a lot of fun. Alright, and already the last category for this video today, guys, which is the difficulty increase in my Japanese reading stats. So I have 4 categories which match the target readership levels of the books that I have read. So we have, starting on the left here, the universal type of books, which I classify as universal, being, you know, the classics, so really classic literature, which really do not have a clear target readership. Anyone can read those, and tales for me is the same as well. It's not specifically meant for children. Lots of tales have lots of nuances and double meanings, which I think always get carried through language, so being able to understand that makes it difficult, more difficult than, you know, your typical regular children book. So that's why I basically put it in a different category, I want to say. But then on the right you have the common children, young adult and adult categories, and of course the difficulty level increases based on those categories. And here is the full target readership mix of all the books that I have read so far. The biggest category here is the adult category, so books targeted to Japanese adults. I have read 113 out of 166 books read, and then I have almost an exact match of the number of children books I have read compared to the number of young adult books that I have read. 23 for children books and 24 for young adult books, and then 6 books corresponding to the universal category that I have just mentioned. And then finally, the last slide for today, which shows the increase in difficulty over time based on book levels. So you can see a clear evolution here in, you know, the proportion of adult targeted books I have read over the past few years, because in 2020 I only read a few, as you can see. In 2021 the proportion was bigger. 2022 I read less overall, so the proportion is not very big. But then from 2023 it kind of exploded, the proportion exploded, and I read a lot more books targeted for adults, simply because from that year I was focused on studying the language for the level N1 of the JLPT exam, which meant that I really needed to also focus my reading immersion practice on more difficult material. And then in 2024, this year, I pretty much only read adult targeted books and a few young adult books and children books. I only rarely read children books now, but you know, at the start I was reading them really to get reading immersion practice, and it worked definitely. It's just that for the most part I did not enjoy myself very much reading those young adult and children's books that were not really up my street, let's say. It's good for the beginning, but after that, at least for me, I see no reason why I should continue reading children's books. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to tell you guys. Really, like I said, this video was only about me sharing with you guys what my reading stats were for my Japanese reading. I hope you liked it. I hope that it will inspire you to perhaps create this kind of visual representation of your reading stats as well in your target language or target languages, or not even in your target language, in fact, in your native language as well, just your reading stats in general. I find it's always interesting to, you know, just for you personally to see what sort of books you're reading, what sort of books you're into. I have not categorized yet the genre of books that I have read, you know, the actual like literary genre, so fantasy books, science fiction. I haven't categorized them yet. Once I do, maybe I will share that with you guys. But so far, those are all the stats that I have collected. I know that you guys are interested in me showing you how I use Notion for my language learning, and also in fact to collect my reading stats in Japanese. This video is actually in preparation already, so it's gonna come out on the channel pretty soon, definitely within this year anyway. And so I hope that you will get everything that you need on that topic in that video. I also know that probably a lot of you will comment that you want to know what I read which books I have read, and this is actually something that I want to make a whole other video of, so it will be coming out on my channel very soon. I think I'm gonna start with like my first 100 books read in Japanese, and then once I will have read the next 100 books, I'm almost there, then I will also produce that video. Thank you for watching today's video, guys, and I will see you in the next one on the channel. Bye bye! Mata ne!
Hello, moon. I push back the serious feeling.